is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Novice by Trudy Canavan, brought to you by Ashley. Chapters 7, 8, and 9. In these chapters, Sonea manages to get away from the class that her tormentors are in, but they have really damaged her reputation and Rothen's in the process. I should have seen it coming. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. This this section of chapters, this is something that I really appreciate about this series, which is that Canavan deals really honestly with what rumor mills are like and how human nature works. And I should have thought about the optics of Sonea staying with Rothen. I think the only reason that it didn't occur to me that it could look this way was because Rothen is so trusted by everybody that I assumed any sort of story like this that began to be circulated would be discounted immediately by everybody and that they would laugh it off. But I think that would be the case if she were not from the slums. But it's an unfortunate combination of not only her being female, but where she comes from and what people believe about women who come from where she does. That combined with Rothen just being a dude makes people really suspicious and fall prey to this vicious rumor that Regin decides to start circulating. And honestly, if I'm being really honest, if I heard this rumor, I probably would also believe it. Because, frankly, there are very few instances in which you see a man in a clear position to take advantage of a young woman, and he does not do that. This is a very fraught situation with her literally staying in the same set of apartments as him. It really is. I am not angry at everyone for believing this rumor. And in fact, in some ways, I'm almost touched that they do and that they take Sonea's side. And because by they, I mean the teachers, because Sonea gets approached by one of the women, the head of the healing faction. And this woman is please tell me if anything is going on. And she does not do it with the tone of someone who is accusing her. She does it in this concerned, is he taking advantage of you? Is he raping you, essentially? And in that regard, I really, really appreciated it. Because it would be so easy for all of the staff, included with the students, to turn their noses up and just be well, that's just what she's like. And I guess that's their arrangement. And to sort of turn a blind eye because they like Rothen and they don't think much of Sonea. But instead, they do try to protect her from what they think of as a threat against her. So as angry as I am that this whole ugly rumor that was fabricated out of the pure thin air by Regin took hold, I really have to respect how it's handled by everybody. And I appreciate that Rothen thinks through all of the potential pitfalls of any course of action that they take, whether she stays with him or not. There's going to be problems with that. And I was pleasantly surprised by how humane they are with her. Because let's be honest, women being abused, it's so frequently turned into, well, if she hadn't done XYZ. And I was ready for this to turn into an ugly example of exactly how not to handle this situation, but also exactly how, like, the woman in the situation is looked down on and the man is not. And instead, Rothen does get looked down on. Like, people are not kosher about this. So, in that respect, this was a kind of a surprising development, and I was a little bit taken aback at my own reaction to the way that this unfolds. Now, don't get me wrong. It is such a shame that she can't continue to live with Rothen, because obviously being with the other novices, it's a risk for her. Like, there is more opportunity to torment her. And yes, she can lock her door and she can put up like kind of protections for herself, but that's still making her so vulnerable. On the other hand, I do think that it did set her too much apart that she wasn't living with them and drew more attention to her. So in that respect, I think this is probably in the end a good thing. And I think they made the right choice in having her move. But it really, when it comes right down to it, what Rothen says is really the thing that galls me, which is that Regin is a freshman, basically. And he has managed to cause her so much trouble that she not only has to move where she lives, but switch classes and like push herself to really work just to get away from him. He should not have this kind of power. He should not be able to cause this kind of damage because he's a fucking child, essentially. But he has his pulse on exactly what buttons to press when it comes to making everybody else suspicious and uncomfortable. You know, like it's hard to watch. It really is. I don't love it. So, okay. I just wanted to give you all my overall impressions on that section, because this, like, she is in the middle of thinking to herself how glad she is that she's living with Regin, or with Rothen. Jesus, can you imagine? And, this is when she gets ambushed by the crowd, and they circle her and physically, like, yank her back, which is not something that they have done before. This is the most aggressive that they have been with her. And there are other people around. There are other older students around, and nobody steps into her defense, which, again, makes sense. I mean, she is literally the only one that comes from her situation in this entire school. We have to be honest about what human nature is like and the kinds of people that exist in the world. And the sort of person that would stand up against a whole crowd and put themselves in the same position, because that's what they'd be doing. They'd be opening themselves up to accusations that they either sympathized with her to a degree that meant that they were somehow also taking advantage of her. Like, it'd be really easy to fuck up somebody else's reputation, or at the very least, like, kind of circulate rumors about them to their family, which would probably get them, like, yelled at by parents, or like the number of repercussions that could occur because of standing up to this crowd. These are real consequences. It's easy to say that somebody should do the right thing, and of course they should, but oftentimes I think we say that sort of thing without really thinking about what that means materially. And I don't even know if Sonea would be happy that somebody, like, I think there'd be some relief initially, and then she would start to see that they were also a target now, and she would wish that they had never done anything. I feel like that's how I would feel. So the fact that nobody steps forward is really, like, I get it. I really do. It's, like, unfortunate and unfair and not right, but really understandable. And the way that they circle her and the things they're saying to her is so ugly. She's saying, "Let me through." And they're saying, "Why don't you beg us to, slum girl?" Yeah, go on and beg. You must be good at it. You've had plenty of practice in the slums, Alend laughed. Surely you haven't forgotten so quickly. I bet you were one of those sniveling brats that hang around the back of our father's houses begging for food. Please give me some food, please, Valen whined. I'm starving. The others laughed and joined in. Or perhaps she had something to sell, Isil suggested. Good evening, my lord. Her voice became a suggestive wheedle. Need some company? Valen choked back a laugh. Just think how many men she's had. Sniggers filled the corridor, and then Alend recoiled from her. She's probably diseased. Not anymore. Regin sent Alend a knowing look. They told us the healers checked her when she was found, remember? They'd have fixed her up. He turned to Sonea and looked her up and down, his lips pursed. So, Sonea. His voice became silky. How much did you charge? He moved closer, and as Sonea shrank away, his hands pressed into her back to push her toward him again. You know, he drawled, perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps I could get to like you. You're a bit skinny, but I can overlook that. Tell me, did you specialize in any certain, favors? Oh, God, this is so disgusting and so predictable. And again, I should have seen it coming. But this particular kind of harassment didn't occur to me. It just didn't. It's so fucking gross. And finally, he says, we'll call it a business arrangement. And she says, you're right, Regin. I've met many men like you before, and I do know exactly what to do with them. She snaked a hand up and wrapped it tightly around his throat. His hands flew to his neck, but before he could grab her wrist, she slipped a leg around his and shoved with all her strength. She felt his knee buckle and enjoyed a surge of triumph as he fell backward, arms flailing the air, and crashed onto the floor. Silence filled the corridor as all novices, young and old, stared at him. Sonea sniffed with disdain. What a fine example you are, Regin. If this is how the men of House Perrin behave, then they have no better manners than the average bull house lout. Regin stiffened and his eyes narrowed to slits. She turned her back at him and glared at the other novices, daring any to touch her again. They backed away, and as the circle broke, she strode through. She had taken only a few steps when Regin's voice echoed loudly in the corridor. You're obviously well qualified to make such comparisons, he called. How does Rothen compare? He must be a very happy man having you living in his rooms. Oh, it all makes sense now. I always wondered how you managed to convince him to be your guardian. So later on, when Sonea is thinking back on this situation, her assessment is that Regin wouldn't have taken things to this extreme if she had not insulted his house. And she wishes that she had just sort of like taken him down to get him out of her way and kept her mouth shut. I'm not sure I believe that. I don't think I agree with her on that. I feel like being physically overpowered is humiliating enough. I think her extra bit about his house probably got to him more than anything. But I honestly, okay, here's the truth. I love that insult that she made. That if this is what you and other people in your house are like, then you're just like fucking commoners. Which, I mean, that's a fucking slap in the face to somebody like him who really wants to believe that he's better than other people. So maybe it's that I don't want to believe that extra jibe is what makes him kind of go over the edge in terms of his like campaign against her, because I just love it so much that she said that. And he is such a, like, I have to wonder where this animosity comes from. Like, what does his family say to him? Is he related to Fergan? Because it feels like everyone here has a certain amount of snobbishness, of course. That's just, classism is just a thing, let's be honest. I mean, all of us, no matter what class we come from, have a group of people that we tend to think we're better than in a way. And whether or not that's a real conscious thought, it's still there. And we may be working to be better people and recognize when we have those thoughts and make an effort to like recontextualize and push that thought away and be like, no, you know what? I just had better opportunities. I'm just more privileged. And that's pretty much an accident. But nevertheless, those ingrained prejudices are in all of us. But with Regin, there's something so specific about it. There is something about how threatened he feels by her that I can't help but wonder where that's coming from, because it feels like there's something more going on here. And all I can think is that he was close to Fergan somehow, or is getting like encouragement from Fergan from afar to torment her. Like, because it feels more like he has a vendetta against her than it does just simple bullying. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just, looking for more reason than is really there, because I don't want to believe that somebody just would hate somebody for the simple reason of them being poor. And that's disturbing to believe. Maybe that's all. And I'm trying to assign some sort of extra motivation in order to make myself feel better. So we have a brief meeting between Lorelin and Director Jarek, who is suggesting to Lorelin that Sonea wants to move up to the next class. Lorelin the main thing with Lorelin is that he's concerned that, not Lorelin, Jarek is concerned that she's moving just to get away from Regin, and if she moves and the next class is no more accepting, then she'll have really pushed herself to the limit for nothing. And Lorelin says, well, she's more advanced than the class that she's in terms of her magic usage. And she's several years older than most of the kids in her class. So she's more mature than most of them. So, in a lot of ways, I feel like this is probably just a good move. Like, yeah, she's behind and she'll have to really buckle down. But I feel like in the end, that other class may just be a better fit for her. And Jarek says that they are a sensible group, the winter class. So, but he says training in magic can't be hurried along, however. She can fill her mind with knowledge, but if she hasn't gained the skill to use her powers well, she may make dangerous mistakes later. She has been using her power for over 6 months, Lorelin reminded him. Though Rothen spent that time teaching her the basic education she needed to enter the university, her powers would have become familiar to her, and it must be frustrating to watch other novices fumbling with theirs. So, I take it you're in favor of allowing this. He gestured to Rothen's request. I am. Lorelin handed back the request. Give her the opportunity. I think you'll find her more resourceful than you expect. And Lorelin asks to be kept informed. He goes over to Daryl's house, and some of you may remember Daryl being the guy who initially told Lorelin about all these murders that were happening. Daryl's a bit of a if podcasts existed during this period or in this world, Daryl would be a murderino. He'd be a big fan of My Favorite Murder. But yeah, he has some other real weird stories. This one that's supposed to be a suicide, this is a weird one, and I don't know what to think of it. Because my main question is, at this point, not even who's doing it. I know it's Lorlin's really thinking that it's probably Acheron, but if it feels like maybe this is a red herring and it's not him. But I'm not even as worried about whether it's him or not as I am about why this person's picking the people that they are. Let's see. Baron comes for dinner to hang out with them. And who's Baron? I'm trying to go back and see. I'm afraid this summer has been a little bit too much for most of my plants. It's been rather dry. I wish the guard had someone with your knowledge in their ranks. Baron has another mystery on his hands. Oh, right. So he's like, basically, he's like the sheriff. Baron, Lorlin is interested in a suicide you've been investigating. It's no secret, just a mystery. A woman approached a guard in her street and told him that she discovered her neighbor dead. He investigated and found a woman with her wrists cut. The mystery is she hadn't lost a great deal of blood yet, and she was still warm. In fact, the wounds were quite shallow. She should have been alive. The blade might have been poisoned. We've considered the possibility, but if that's the case, it must be a subtle poison we've never heard of. All poisons leave signs, even if the damage is only visible in the internal organs. We found no weapon, which might have retained some residue. And that is strange in itself. If someone slashes their wrists, the implement they used is usually close by. We searched the house and found nothing but a few kitchen knives, which were clean and still in their box. She wasn't strangled either, from what we can tell. But there are other details which make me suspicious. I found footprints that didn't match the shoes of any servants, friends, or family. The intruder's shoes were old and strangely shaped, so they left some distinctive markings. In the room where the woman was discovered, the window was unlocked and not quite closed. I found fingerprints and smudges on the sill that looked like dried blood, so I had another look at the body and discovered the same fingerprints on her wrists. Hers? No, the fingerprints were large, a man's. Someone tried to stop the bleeding, perhaps, then fled through the window when he heard others approaching? Perhaps, but the window is 3 stories up, and the wall is smooth and has few handholds. I don't think even an experienced thief could have climbed down. Were there any footprints below? The young man hesitated before answering. When I went outside to inspect the ground, I found the strangest thing. It was as though someone had flattened the dirt into a perfect circle. In the center were 2 footprints, the same as those in the room above, and others leading away. I followed them, but they led onto pavement. So Lorlin realizes that magicians levitate by creating a disk of power below their feet, which could leave a circular impression in soft soil or sand. So it has to be a magician making these attacks, and he left by the window and levitated down to the ground and then left. And he thinks that it was the same, like Baron thinks that it's the same person that's committing these other murders, but that he says there are no cuts on the woman's shoulders, which is the MO of the other serial killer that they've been tracking. So it doesn't seem like it's the same person on the surface, and they could just be operating under different, but you know, there's also like maybe they got interrupted and they were going to attack her in that same manner, or maybe they're getting lazy and realizing they don't need to do all of that because just slashing wrists works just as well. Like, I have a hard time believing that there are 2 people out there committing murders like this, but stranger things have happened. Maybe there's a copycat out there now. I don't know. And something that occurred to me while I was reading this, because, you know, I'd been sort of like, I'm operating on the assumption that this isn't Acheron doing this. I don't know why I feel that way, but there's just I think all signs point to him so much that I am suspicious of that. So if I'm not going to believe he did it, I feel like I want to believe whoever is doing it is somebody that we have already met. And that's not necessarily true, but I feel like that would mean more as a reader. And the only person that I can think of who could do this that we have met already is that guy from the last book that Sonea meets when she's on the run. And he's like hiding with the thieves, and he has power, but has like tamped it down and is in hiding, essentially. I don't remember his name or what kind of circumstances surrounded that, if we found out what those circumstances even were. But I do remember him having a really bad temper and being super defensive for some reason. So, you know, like I'm not saying that's who it is, but I am saying it feels like he didn't seem like a good person. He didn't seem like a nice guy who cared about other people. So that's not completely out of the question. All right. So then we go to Dannyl. Dannyl's whole deal he's just really going on some adventures here. So, he finally, like, he's been entertaining all these different people and meeting all these different people. Like, as an ambassador, the biggest part of your job is like glad handing and making friends and connections and trying to find out as much info as you can from people. And Dannyl is a really good choice for this job. He decides finally that he's going to go to this, the Great Library, which he had intended to do a lot sooner, but he's been in the city for like months at this point. And I'm just really like, there's a point where Sonea's thinking about how much time had passed, and she thinks to herself that it's been like 5 weeks. But when Dannyl is thinking about his time here, he is thinking that it's been a few months. So I'm like, I had been operating under the assumption that what was going on with Dannyl was happening within the same time frame with Sonea. And part of that is assuming that Dannyl leaves for Eileen on the same day that Sonea starts classes. I'm realizing that's not necessarily true. There's nobody in the audience on Crowdcast today, so there's nobody to correct me or feed me information about this if I'm wrong. So the Great Library is a friggin' giant, like, cave carved out of the rock. It is on a cliff face. And this shit is really impressive. Like, it's so huge inside. There are multiple rooms. There's just, like, there's a lot more going on. It's not just, you know, a cave that has been, like, that was discovered and they turned into. This is a place that they carved out specifically to become the library. On one side were the windows he had seen from the carriage. They were huge and filled with small squares of glass fixed within an iron framework. The wall opposite was patterned by squares of golden light. Chairs were positioned in groups of 3 or 4 at intervals, and standing beside the closest was an elderly man. "Good evening, Ambassador Dannyl." The man bowed with the cautious stiffness of the very old. "I am Irand, the librarian." So it turns out that Acheron, like, what he studied while he was there, Tyann really remembers pretty well. And I have to confess, I am a little suspicious of Tyann. I like the guy, but the amazing recall that he has of everything that Acheron studied while he was here is just, it's suspect to me. You know, I'm just not... He's just too helpful, and I can't help but wonder if he's either, like, part of Acheron, like Team Acheron, or, for all I know, like, I don't know how things work with the magic here in a lot of ways. Can false memories be implanted in somebody's mind? Like, it's just... The fact that Dannyl found somebody who is so perfectly suited to helping him on the task that he's supposed to be performing, that's just feels a little bit convenient to me. And that might just be the storytelling. Maybe it is kind of convenient, and that's just how the story's written. But whenever something is that convenient, I always, like, kind of side-eye it, because that's the kind of person I am. So I'm wondering about him. And it turns out that he knows a lot of languages. All the ancient dialects of Eileen and Curalia. Our old languages are very similar, but the further back you look, the more differences there are. I can speak modern Vindo. I learned it from some servants at home, and a bit of Lance. I can translate the ancient Vindo and Tentur glyphs given access to my books. Once you know a few, the rest come easily. One day I'll get around to learning modern Lonmar and a few of their old languages. I just haven't had reason to yet. After that, well, perhaps I'll start on Sachakan languages. Their old tongues are quite similar to ours. So, when he gets to the main library, it's so big that Dannyl cannot see the wall on the opposite side of the room. It's just it's so enormous that he, like, is blown away by it and just stands there staring in utter shock for a minute. This is the oldest room, perhaps thousands of years old. Who made it? Dannyl breathed. Nobody knows. How am I going to find what I need? He asked despairingly. Oh, that's not a problem. Tyann's voice was suddenly bright, a sound that cut through the heavy silence of the room. I have everything waiting for you in the same study room that Acheron used. Follow me. These are the books Acheron read. The volumes ranged from tiny, palm-sized books to a huge tome that would have been a challenge to carry. Dannyl examined them, unstacking and restacking as he read the titles. Where do I start? This was the first one Acheron read. Dannyl looked at Tyann, impressed. The young man's eyes were bright with enthusiasm. You remember that well? The scholar grinned. You need a good memory to use the library. How else do you find a book again after you've read it? Dannyl looked down at the tome in his hands. Magical Practices of the Grey Mountain Tribes. The date below the title indicated that the book was at least 5 centuries old, and he knew there hadn't been tribes living in the mountains between Eileen and Corelia for at least that long. Intrigued, he opened it and started reading. So that's chapter 7. I realize that I have 2 more chapters to cover, and I am halfway through my time, so I better move my ass. So Rothen has included Lord Yalden in his spying. Chapter 8 starts off with Rothen training Yalden to sit in the spot that Dannyl pointed out to him and listen and try and pick up some gossip, which I find really delightful because Yalden is not good at it. He's being really obvious that he's listening super hard. And Lorlin comes in and speaks to Rothen about the rumors. She told me 4 weeks ago that one of her fellow novices had invented the rumor, and she was concerned people would believe it. I told her not to worry. Gossip has a lifespan, that speculation eventually becomes old news and is forgotten. Lorlin frowned. Rumors like this are not dismissed as lightly as you may hope. Several magicians have come to me to express their concerns. They feel it is not proper for any magician to have a young woman living in their rooms. Moving her will do nothing to disprove the rumor. Lorlin nodded. That is true. Nevertheless, it would prevent further speculation that could be quite harmful to you both. In retrospect, Sonea should have moved to the novices' quarters when she began classes. Not to prevent what the rumor suggests, but to prevent rumors beginning at all. Nobody believes anything untoward has occurred between you and Sonea. Then why move her at all? She'll still spend time with me in my rooms, in study, or simply for the evening meal. If we give in now, how long will it be before others question the intent behind every moment we spend together? Leaving things as they are, and those who are foolish enough to give gossip credence will be assured that no evidence of improper conduct has been found. So, in the end, because, Rothen, like he says here, well, she'll still be with me in my apartments when we study. In the end, not only does she move out, but they start to do her studies in the library instead, so that everything is in full view of everyone and there can't be any suggestion of impropriety. And Rothen tries one last, what's the word I want? One last ditch argument, which is that, but keeping her with me would keep her safe because she knows about Acheron. And Lorlin really considers this for a minute and then is just like, listen, she's like, it really materially, she's not going to be that much safer with you than she would be in her own apartments. Like, I don't think that that's a factor. I really like the moment where Rothen realizes that Lorlin considered the possibility that this rumor was true, because he can't believe that Lorlin would consider that that he would do something like that. But then he realizes that Lorlin has just learned some really horrific shit about his closest friend in his life. So naturally, that makes you realize that you don't know people as well as you think you do. So I like that a lot, because that's the main thing that happens when somebody's accused of sexual harassment or assault, is that people like to be like, well, I know him and he'd never do that, without ever really stopping to think, do you really know him? I have a hard time really believing that I know almost anyone. I feel like anyone is capable of certain things. And Lorelyn is learning that lesson. And that's a lesson that I feel like women have to learn sooner than men in general, because women get to see the two different faces that people present more readily because we get victimized more. So we learn a lot younger that people can easily be charming to everyone around them while secretly being a monster. And Lorelyn, bless his heart, has not had to learn that yet, you know. And of course, if it wasn't for the mind reading, I don't think he would have believed Sonea. Why would he? Like, that's a crazy thing that she's claiming to have seen. And that's his friend. He wouldn't want to. It's just the fact that he can get in her head and actually see it for himself that solidifies his trust in her. And that, does that even count as trust when it's like basically caught on film? That's really up for debate. It's trust means that you have a belief that a certain person would not lie to you. And I don't think that's what you would call his relationship with Sonea in that regard. But anyway, so the next section is Tanya ushering in Lady Venara, the head of the healers, who asks her about this whole rumor and whether or not there's any truth to any of this. And Venara says, listen, I know that you don't want to move, but if these rumors really get proven true in any way, your standing in the guild would be damaged and you would definitely lose Rothen's guardianship. And Sonea offers for Lorelyn to truth read her again, which Venara says, I hope it doesn't come to that, but I wish that they would just do that in some ways. As much as I said that, Lorelyn doesn't necessarily trust her, it comes down to just straight up fact, if it's happening or not, and trust doesn't matter. Like in that case, just read her and find out. I worry because the first reaction that Sonea has after Lady Venara leaves is to punch her pillows and say that she wants to kill Regin. And Tanya hears her. I want to think that Tanya is on Sonea's side. I'm saying Tanya. I don't like Tanya and Sonea. I want to think that Tanya is on Sonea's side, but I can't trust anybody here because everybody Tanya's been there longer than Sonea, and she has to have had her own relationships and alliances before any of this, any of this started to go down before Sonea ever showed up. So, yeah, I'm worried that her saying that she wants to kill Regin is going to come back and bite her in the ass somehow. Lorelyn gets a letter from Dannyl describing what he has discovered in Eileen. And I'm trying to find the exact spot. Tyen visited the wharf where records have been kept of all arrivals and departures for many years. He found mention of a Lord Acherin who arrived here over 10 years ago, then left some months later for Lonmar, then returned to Capia to take another ship to the Vin Islands, returning again to Capia a month later. There were no further entries. Considering the information I have gathered, it is likely that the High Lord visited the splendid temple in Lonmar. I have copied out my notes and included them with this letter. So he decides that he is going to travel to the places that Acherin had traveled to. Okay. Dannyl still doesn't know what Lorelyn is looking for. I'm concerned that Dannyl is going to stumble into some real shit and be totally unprepared because Lorelyn has not informed him on what's really happening here. But that's the end of chapter 8. 9 begins with Sonea asking Tanya to get her plainer versions of all of her possessions because like she's got hairbrushes and she's got different like accessories that are pretty expensive, and she feels like it will be taken the wrong way if she goes down into the novice's quarters with a bunch of beautiful things that Rothen gave her, which I have to agree and admire that she even considered that, because I don't think that would have occurred to me. Because I like pretty things and I would just want to keep them. You know, I wouldn't think about the optics of having them. To be honest, I don't think I considered that other people would be in and out of her room and seeing that stuff. But they're dorms. I mean, probably they will be. And even if people aren't in and out of her rooms, they'll probably see some stuff while she's moving, and servants will be in and out, if not students. So, yeah, you know. Rothen tries to convince her to stay, or, you know, at least be like, are you sure you want to do this? And she very firmly says yes, even though in her heart she's not as confident as she appears to be to him. Now it wasn't just the novices muttering her names in the corridors. She'd heard enough whispers from magicians to know their opinion of her. No one really cared who had started the rumors or why. Rumors like these should never start in the first place, as one teacher had put it. Living with Rothen looked suspicious, especially when her past was taken into consideration, as if every woman of the slums was a whore. And she'd heard many people asking why she should be treated any differently than the other novices. They had to live in the novices' quarters, and so should she. Which all of this is very, you know, rational and reasonable. So she gets brought to the room that she's going to be staying in by Erend, who is one of the warriors. And he is not somebody that most people like, apparently. And he's really, like, cold to her. No visitors after the evening gong. If you are to be absent for any number of nights, please inform me 2 days prior to the first evening. The room is to be kept clean and tidy. Make arrangements with the servants as necessary. Am I clear? Yes, my lord. So she's at least near the entrance of the building, which means that she won't have to pass a million rooms to get to her room, which is a small mercy. Tanya offers to, like, bring her food to her rooms, but Sonea is, like, worried that that will make Tanya a target also, because they'll have to know about Tanya's association with her. And let's see. Let's meet Rothen at the Magician's Library. Okay, so that's the end of that section. And then we have Dannyl's travels. Listen, this is something that I was not ready for. To back it up a little bit, Dannyl, when Dannyl had expressed his desire to visit Lonmar and Vin, he had been sure that the first ambassador would disapprove. After all, he'd only been in Eileen a few months. There it is. That's the few months thing. But Erend had been delighted. It seemed that Lorelin had asked him to visit these countries to deal with some ambassadorial matters, and Erend was not at all fond of ship travel. He'd promptly decided that Dannyl would go in his place. This was all suspiciously convenient. How did he get back to the guild? Dannyl started, then turned to regard Tyend. Who? Acheron. They say he just walked up to the guild gates, all dirty and dressed in ordinary clothes, and nobody recognized him at first. Tyend's eyes widened. Really? Did he say why? Dannyl shrugged. Possibly. I have to admit I didn't pay much attention at the time. If we're looking for ancient magic, the reason Acheron turned up looking shabby at the end of his search is probably not going to tell us anything. Lorelin said his quest wasn't completed, remember? So here comes the fucking... What is the name of these eels? I can't. It's really freaking me out, guys. I'm kind of jumping ahead here because what happens next is actually the visit that Lorelin has with Acheron. But that's pretty uneventful except for the fact that he is a little uncomfortable being around Acheron the way that he was before, which we already know. And when he talks about Sonea, Acheron is pretty practical about the idea. She was fortunate to spend as long with Rothen as she did. Someone was bound to protest eventually. I'm surprised the issue wasn't raised earlier. And then he asks if Lorland, because he's so interested in Sonea, is thinking about recruiting more from the lower classes. Lorland grimaced. No, are you? Looking away, Acheron lifted his shoulders slightly. Sometimes. There must be a lot of potential we miss by ignoring so much of the population. Sonea is proof of that. Lorland chuckled. Not even you could persuade the guild to try it. Returning with a large platter, Takan set it down between Lorland and Acheron. I find that interesting, that Acheron is so open to that suggestion, and I'm wondering if that has anything to do with his exploration of magics that the guild is opposed to. And let's see. Lorland asks Acheron if he has any diaries or journals about his time researching in Eileen, because he's trying to get more information. And Acheron says, my journal and all the notes I made were destroyed during the last part of my journey. I've often wished that I had made a copy, and sometimes I have a fancy to return and collect all the information again. Like you, I have responsibilities that keep me in Karelia. Perhaps when I'm an old man, I'll slip away again. So again, we have this mention of a sort of disastrous end to his journeys, but we don't know what that is. And Lorland doesn't ask. And I can't tell if he doesn't ask because he feels like it's too private, because Acheron has never revealed it without prodding, that Lorland has decided he shouldn't ask and that it would be rude, or if it's not mentioned because Lorland knows already and doesn't need to ask. But yeah. So, you know what? I'm really sorry, guys. I'm realizing now, this is actually chapter 7, 8, 9, and 10, that I read, because I just got to the beginning of chapter 10 when Sonea has started with the next class. Because it was like roughly 60 pages. It was like I should either stop reading at like 42 pages or read all the way to like 61 pages. And I decided to opt for the 61. So my intro was incorrect. My apologies. But I will write the correct intro or the correct label on the episode title so that y'all have the correct information when you come into this episode. So Sonea starts with the winter class. She manages to pass the tests and get into the class. There is one kid who seems somewhat welcoming to her. She headed back to the front of the room, and a boy looked across at her and smiled faintly. She moved toward him and was gratified to see him slide his chair aside a little to make room. So they're, not exactly like welcoming her with open arms, but nobody's being an asshole to her. And when they go out to dinner, essentially what they tell her is nobody's going to give you a hard time, but also mostly we're not giving you a hard time because we don't have the luxury of giving a shit about that anymore. We are working really hard now, and classes have gotten to a point where we need all of our energy focused on that. The boy who introduces himself, the one that smiled at her, is Poril. Poril family Vindel House Harrell. So yeah, he says that he started the summer before last and that he's still he's with this class. So he's a strong learner, or he's a slow learner. He could be strong magically, but still have trouble understanding the lessons, or he might simply be too weak to complete the tasks that he was given, which I'll be interested to find out which of those it is. So yeah, you'll have to work hard. This isn't control exercises anymore. She held back a laugh. Control lessons? He obviously didn't know much about her history. Or he did, and this was just a more subtle kind of jibe than what she was used to. So they were able to fall into a sort of rhythm together, and she has to like just go so fast in order to take notes and keep up with the rest of the class. Regin notices her sitting with the other class and finally realizes that she has moved up, and he pushes his chair back like he's going to get up and come over and make some trouble for her. And thankfully, Kano puts a hand on Regin's arm, and Regin sits back down and leaves her alone. But I am very curious what would have happened if he came and harassed her while she was with the other class. So she's studying with Rothen in the library, which he's gratified that she even thought of this. The lessons were observed by the librarian, Lord Rothen, and she had access to books other novices needed special permission to use. Regin, like her, could only enter the library under the supervision of his guardian. Rothen had to admire her ability to turn a bad situation to her advantage. Which, that's true. You know, like, it's a really, I feel like that says a lot for her character, that she's, like, really trying her best here to make the best of the situation. Rothen passes Regin and stares Regin down, and Regin does not seem at all intimidated. At all. So that bums me out, because I was sort of hoping that he would wither a little, but he doesn't. As Rothen considered the confidence and malevolence in the boy's gaze, he felt a growing certainty that his hopes that Regin was losing interest in Sonea were in vain. So, he gets a message here from his son. Hi, did we know he had a son? I don't feel like I knew that. But, yeah, Dorian is his son's name. And he is a healer, as it turns out. And he doesn't like to leave and come back to see his dad, because it's a big journey and he'll be gone for weeks. And this little village would be without a healer for a little while. So he doesn't like to leave them sort of defenseless in that manner. But not only does he want to see his dad, at this point now he wants to see Sonea. So he is saying that he's going to come visit for 2 weeks. And I'll be interested to see what he's like. All right, finally, fucking the eels. I know this shouldn't be the main event, but I was just so taken aback that the eels were real, as was Dannyl. Turning away, he started along the rail, then stopped as he saw that several short lengths of thick black rope were strewn across his path. He frowned, thinking how easily he could have tripped. Then one of the ropes moved. Taking a step back, he stared at the thing. It was too smooth to be rope. And why would a rope be cut into short pieces anyway? Each length of blackness glimmered slimily in the lantern light. One turned and started creeping toward him. Eyoma! That's the name of them. I thought these were a joke, he muttered as he backed away from the creatures. They were supposed to be a joke. So, these things don't have a face. They just have a round mouth, like a remora or a what are those things that cling onto the rocks in streams? These things are really tough to get rid of. I'm going to be straight up honest with you guys. I can't help but wonder if this is a coincidence, or if somebody was able to get these things to like attack the ship because they were trying to stop Dannyl getting from where he was going. That would be an enormous amount of talent, though, if, like, for example, Acheron was able to pull this off from as far away as he is. Maybe he could. I don't know, again, what his abilities are here or what magic is out of the question in this universe. But it's just the fact that this happens, it just feels so suspect to me. So it turns out that they use the byproduct of brewing the alcohol called CO, which is called Yomi, to get them off the ship. They pour it over these eels and it burns them. But it's not enough. Like, there are so many of them. that they have actually sort of jammed the ship. Like they get under, a huge swarm of them gets under one side of the ship, and it's enough to make the whole thing list to one side. And if they fall into the water, that's it. Like they're going to be eaten alive in seconds. So Dannyl goes up to the front hull of the ship, and he's just shocked by how bad it is. Like there are so many of them that he was not ready for it. Tyen comes out, and Dannyl tries to be like, get back in your room. But when he goes back into his room, he's like, oh God, they're in there too. So Dannyl starts using his power to very carefully break the swarm and get the ship to like come back to even. And he has to be careful about it, because if he disperses the clump that's holding the ship up on one side too quickly, the ship will just go down and then list the other way. So he has to be so careful about how he's doing it. And it takes like all night. It's hours of work, and he is exhausted by the end of this. I just didn't expect this to go on as long as it did. I didn't think there could possibly be that many. But yeah, this is like a real fucking problem that they expect to encounter again. So he says, you know, the captain says something like, you should go and sleep, and we may need your help again tonight. But yeah, yikes. Meanwhile, Tyen, who is suffering from some pretty bad seasickness and has like circles under his eyes and just doesn't look great, Tyen doesn't want Dannyl to heal him and reacts really violently, actually, when Dannyl takes his hand and begins to heal him from his seasickness. And we don't know why, but I feel like there's got to be quite a story there. There's something that Tyen saw that he doesn't like. And I'm like, is that Acheron? Does he have some memory of Acheron that he doesn't trust Dannyl because of this? I'm just, really curious about that. But so that's how that chapter ends, is Dannyl tumbling into bed and falling asleep. And he like thinks to himself, when he sees how terrible Tyen looks, he thinks about administering healing magic while Tyen is asleep. But he feels like Tyen would probably be able to tell, and that he really wants to have a friend in this unfamiliar place, and he doesn't want to ruin it by breaking trust right away. So I respect him, like, not only respecting this guy and not doing it for the sake of not doing it, but I also respect the fact that he like thinks through the repercussions of it in a practical manner as well. Yeah. So, but I wasn't ready for the eels. I wasn't at all. Like, this is the kind of thing that we haven't seen yet in this book. Like an unfamiliar creature straight up attacking people. This is just a tone that we haven't encountered yet in this story before. So that caught me off guard as much as anything. But yeah, these 4 chapters were really packed. There was a lot happening, and I read through them really fast. So I have been enjoying this a lot. And as much as I enjoyed the first book, I'm enjoying the second one more because I know who everyone is, and I'm more invested in the story by now. So thank you very much to Ashley for commissioning this episode. And thank you all so much for listening. I hope that it's been entertaining. And I hope to, I think the next episode covering this is actually later this week. So there should be another one coming up not too long. So yeah, thank you everyone again. And I will see you soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.